Hi, my name is Gerald Patterson, and thank you for watching. I'm going to start out on the light side. Many years ago, when I was a child, I have to admit I was a pest, and I was pestering my mother a lot. And when I was a child, I asked my mother if I was adopted, and my mother said, "Not yet." Not yet, but we placed an ad. Well, that's just a joke. It's just a joke. But it is true that as a child, I was a pest. And I was not only pestering my mother a lot, I was pestering my three sisters. And one of my sisters learned how to stop me in my tracks. She would say to me, "Grow up. Grow up." It was like a punch in my solar plexus. Grow up. Put me on the defensive. And you know that's been a sensitive issue all my life, this issue of growing up. And even though I'm much older now, I'm still working on it. I'm still working on growing up. So it's no surprise to me that the theme of my book and the theme of my talk tonight is, tonight, whatever. The theme of my talk today is growing. And you might say, why the topic of growing? Isn't growing for young people? Here we are all grown-ups. And I'm sure we've all been through a lot in our lives already. Why the topic of growing? Well, the growing I'm talking about is what Dr. Scott Peck, the famous psychiatrist, called the growth of the human spirit. He says the growth of the human spirit is so important. In fact, he says the growth of the human spirit is the end, the reason for human existence. So what do we mean by the growth of the human spirit? Well, as I see it, the growth of the human spirit means growing stronger and healthier mentally, emotionally, psychologically, socially, and spiritually. This type of growth is for people of all ages. We never outlive our need for the growth of the human spirit. Michelangelo, the famous Italian sculptor and painter, once said, "Ancora imparo," which translated means, "I am still learning." What's remarkable about this, he said this when he was 87 years old. So that tells me I'm never too old to keep learning and to keep growing. I was in a church school hall many years ago, and there's a plaque on the wall. There was a short quotation from Cardinal John Henry Newman. It said, "Growth is the only evidence of life." And more recently, I came across another quotation from the same man, Cardinal John Henry Newman, and he said, "To live is to change, and to change a lot is perfection." James Allen says, men and women are anxious to improve their circumstances, and yet they are unwilling to improve themselves. They therefore remain bound. I was in the library many years ago, and I remember reading a quotation from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe said, "Everybody wants to be somebody, nobody wants to grow." Why is it that nobody wants to grow? Well, growing is not easy because it takes courage and self-discipline. Growing is not the path of least resistance. So, growing is not, as I see it, growing comes with facing challenges. Growth comes with dealing with problems head on. Growth comes with accepting responsibilities. Growth comes with getting out of our comfort zones. So this is not easy. Why should we as grown-ups continue to try to grow? Well, Dr. Scott Peck, who I mentioned before, asks the same question, but then he answers it right away. This is what he says. Excuse me. Why desire to evolve, to grow at all, you may ask? If you ask the question, perhaps you do not know enough about joy. Joy is the payoff. There is joy in growth. And St. John Paul II said, every human heart is made for joy. I was reading recently about trees and tree roots, and no matter how big the tree is, no matter how tall the tree is, no matter how old the tree is, the roots keep growing. When the roots stop growing, the tree dies. Now we could say we human beings have inner roots. And when our inner roots stop growing, we die inside. Now I did a little research and I put together a collection of quotations, the best quotations related to the theme of growing, and put these quotations along with my comments on these quotations in my own book. It's called, surprise, The Growth of the Human Spirit. In my book, I have over 200, over 200 quotations, more like 250 quotations. And today I'm going to recite all 250 quotations for you. No, I'm just kidding, I wouldn't do that to you. But I'd like to give you just a short sampling of quotations in my book. Now before that, I just give you an idea of the content of my book. I'll give you the chapter headings. The chapter headings of most of the chapters in my book. There's growing in strength, growing in courage, growing in goodness, growing in forgiveness, growing, in honesty, growing in maturity, growing in love, growing in gratitude, growing in wisdom, growing in greatness, and growing in faith and hope. Now I give you a few quotes from my book, and remember this is not my wisdom, it's the wisdom of the people that I quote. Starting off in the category of strength, growing in strength. Oh, do not pray for an easy life, rather pray to be stronger men and women. Philip Brooks. Courage, growing in courage. Always do what you are afraid to do. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Love, growing in love. It is impossible to love without giving. Richard Bronstein. And it is only those who do not love that go empty in this world. Robert Hugh Brown. Wisdom, growing in wisdom. I do not think much of a man or a woman who is not wiser today than they were yesterday. Abraham Lincoln. And greatness, growing in greatness. It is a grand mistake to think of being great without goodness. Benjamin Franklin. Now my next quote is from an unlikely source. It's from Jim Carrey. As you know, Jim Carrey is a movie actor and a comedian, and he's very talented. But for me, Jim Carrey is not an example of a good role model. But I did find an interesting quote from Jim Carrey, and before I give you that, I'll give you one of his weird jokes. Jim Carrey was speculating about what hell might be like, and he said maybe hell is just having to listen to our grandfathers breathe through their noses when they're eating sandwiches. Now a serious quote from Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey, as you know, is rich and famous, and this is what he says. I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it is not the answer. So what is the answer? Well, Jim Carrey, I believe, had 2 failed marriages, so apparently marriage was not the answer for him. And after that, Jim Carrey, I believe, partnered for 5 years with a former Playboy bunny. But they broke up also, so apparently that was not the answer. And Jim Carrey did a bungee jump off a high bridge. Apparently that was not the answer. So if Jim Carrey came up to you and he said, I have everything, and I've done everything, but it is not the answer. So what is the answer? How would you answer Jim Carrey? Comparing Jim Carrey with the old rock and roll band, the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones are old, but I think they're still going, and they had a hit song. It was called Satisfaction. I can't, and the words, some of the words of the song, I can't get no satisfaction. And I try, and I try, and I try, and I try. I can't get no satisfaction. So this group, this Rolling Stones group, they're rich, very rich and famous, and they can't get no satisfaction. So I think, like Jim Carrey, they're asking, or they don't know the answer. What is the answer? No satisfaction in this world. So getting back to Jim Carrey, if he came up to me and he said, I have everything and I've done everything, but it is not the answer. So what is the answer? I would say I don't have all the answers, but I would refer him to a quotation from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, as you know, is a Christian writer. And C.S. Lewis says, if I find in my mind a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Excuse me a minute.